Today we're going to talk about drugs and consciousness. For the full effect, rewatch this lecture multiple times while doing a different substance. So do it the first time sober, then high, then drunk, then rolling, then tripping, right? I want you to really have like a hands-on experience with this. And please actually don't do that. I like my job a lot, so. So what is consciousness? What? It, uh, it's kind of hard to say, right? We know that we have this like thing, and it's some kind. Sometimes we'll call it like the soul, and it's we have this I that's thinking and processing the world, but there are also parts of us that we're not fully aware of, the parts of us that like make us want to do things that we don't necessarily want to do. But is that a part of us or is that not a part of us, right? How do you really distinguish that part of you is not you, right? So is it wise or scientifically accurate to only describe the part of me that I'm aware of as me, right? So when we talk about consciousness, we're talking about this kind of hard to pin down experience that's basically just, you know, uh, one of my favorite explanations for what consciousness is basically an electrical current running through a pile of meat, which is essentially what our brains are, right? There are a whole bunch of cells and they release these electrical charges sometimes and some chemicals, and these electrical charges and chemicals make us. And how we get from meat to human consciousness is sometimes very puzzling, right? So in looking at our experience of the world, we realize that there are some things that are objective, meaning they are generally accepted to be true, but there are also parts that are subjective. And that's where things get very interesting because we might all hear the same actual sound, but our experience of that sound, right? I might listen to I don't know, Kanye West and might go, he's a lyrical genius. And other people might go, he's on something. He's not good, right? Same objective experience, but our subjective experience of it, how we each perceive that objective information differs. And that's why consciousness is so interesting. What is it about our brains that allows us to interpret the same thing in different ways? So obviously, if you can be conscious, you can also be unconscious. Now, sometimes we're unconscious because we are in a coma or we are dead. But sometimes we're unconscious because our brains just decide to take a break for 8-ish hours every night. Now, as we go to sleep, right, just in case you were wondering, like, I never been unconscious. Yes, you have. You've been asleep. And if you haven't, talk to a scientist. That's not you should sleep. That's the thing that we should do, right? So we go through these various stages of sleep, and we're not going to go too deep into them, but just know that we start with very light sleep, and then we progress into deeper forms of sleep, right? We have non-rapid eye movement sleep, which are stages 1 through 4. And then we have stage 5, which is rapid eye movement sleep, which is when a lot of our dreams occur. Uh, Sometimes a lot of our like sleep talking and sleep babbling will happen during stage 4, just in case you ever need to know that. And what we'll see when we're looking at an EEG is that our brain waves will change over time because different parts of the brain are active during different stages of sleep, and the activity that's occurring in those parts of the brain is changing over time. So that's sleep in a nutshell. So once again, REM sleep is when our most vivid and often most bizarre dreams occur. And when you're waking up during REM sleep, that's when you're most likely to actually recall your dreams. So if you fell asleep and then you were woken up during stage three sleep, then you might not be likely to remember your dreams. But if you were woken up during REM, you go, oh, I had this crazy, I was in a pool, right? And the pool it wasn't water, it was just made out of lotion. And then my mom kept on saying, we need more lotion in the pool. And this is the thing, like, my mom wasn't my mom, she was Beyonce. But, like, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, my mom was Beyonce. But, like, one, I just called her mom, and like I wasn't even aware that it was weird that my mom was Beyonce. I had like a moment where I was like, "Oh, my mom's Beyonce," but like my dad wasn't Jay Z; it was Adam Driver, and like they were just perfectly normal. And then I think Adam was like barbecuing or something. Right? That's a REM stage dream. Now, as you're probably aware, sleep isn't always easy. Ironically, it's a thing that all of us need to do, but a lot of us have a very uh, hard time with sleep. So, a few sleep disorders. One you've probably heard of, insomnia, which is an inability to get adequate amounts of sleep. So, on average, you're getting 6 or fewer hours of sleep per night. You have a hard time falling asleep. You have a hard time staying asleep. Next are hypersomnia and narcolepsy, which are related disorders, but the difference is hypersomnia is when you need more sleep than the average person. And even when you get large amounts of sleep, so you could sleep 12 hours, you might still have issues feeling awake and alert during the day. So it's a increased need for sleep. Narcolepsy, you're also going to see that need for sleep during the day, but you might not always see the increased need for longer hours of sleep. And with narcolepsy specifically, you're often seeing that people are falling asleep randomly during the day. So we also have REM behavior disorder, which will just focus on sleepwalking. And what happens is when you're falling asleep, your brain, because there are different parts of it that are focused on specific tasks, sometimes what might happen is parts of your brain are asleep while others are still awake when all parts should be asleep. So you might have a dream of going to the kitchen and making yourself a delicious sandwich, and then you actually go to the kitchen and make yourself a delicious sandwich. On the other side, you have sleep paralysis, which is when you wake up and all parts of your body or your brain should be awake, but unfortunately, the parts that are in control of your muscle movement aren't active. So even though you're trying to move your body, you can't. A couple things that aren't on the slide that I'm just going to mention for funsies. We have sleep apnea, which is when there's some sort of blockage of your ability to breathe during your sleep. Then we also have people who have issues with having a traditional circadian rhythm. So there are some people who actually are morning people. There are some people who are actually night people. So usually what should happen is when it's bright outside, you are awake. When it is dark outside, you start to get sleepy. But some people will, normally be able to wake up at like 6 or 7 in the morning. Some people will naturally want to wake up at like 4 or 5 in the morning, and they'll have no issue with that. Other people can stay up until 2 or 3 o'clock at night with no issue because their brains still feel awake. But you ask them to wake up and be alert at 10 or 11 a.m., and they're dead tired because the circadian rhythm, the part of your brain that's telling you when you should be awake and when you shouldn't be, is shifted in comparison to what would be considered normal. Let's talk about drugs. Drugs are super fun. They mess with your brain. And we talked about the different parts of the brain and our biochemistry. So we know that there's a very delicate balance and that there are all these neurons and chemicals that are responsible for all parts of our thinking and behavior. So, stimulation of these pathways or any changes to them are going to cause changes in our behavior. And also, they're going to change our experience of the world around us, which is why sometimes our mood can change with drugs. Something that we normally would perceive as threatening, we perceive as non threatening, or vice versa. So we have stimulants, things like caffeine, meth, amphetamine, cocaine, right? And these arouse and stimulate our central nervous system. So they tell us to go and do things. They make us alert, right? These are usually abused when you're seeing somebody who's trying to study more, right? So they might take something like Ritalin or Adderall, which are stimulants, in order to stay awake and to focus more. Or if you have something like narcolepsy or hypersomnia, where you're always feeling tired during the day, you might take a stimulant, right? You might just self medicate with caffeine, or you might actually get a specific prescription for a stronger stimulant to keep you alert and awake during the day. Depressants and sedatives. So alcohol is fun. Everybody loves alcohol, except for the people who don't, and they don't. So one issue that is probably the first that pops in your mind is alcoholism, right? It can lead to severe liver damage. It can lead to very severe addiction. And also, we have to be careful with alcohol around a developing fetus because it can lead to what's called fetal alcohol syndrome, which could have devastating effects on cognitive development, which is going to lead to borderline intellectual disability. If you're not familiar with that term, we used to refer to that as mental retardation. We do not anymore. So, alcohol in excess can be highly problematic. Some people enjoy their sleeping pills with a little bit of alcohol. Now, the reason why you should mix them is because alcohol tells your brain to release more GABA. And if you remember GABA, GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So it tells your brain to slow down. Barbiturates and sleeping pills make GABA more effective in your brain. So it's that if you've ever heard the thing of like, would you rather fight like 10 kindergartners or three kindergartners with a knife, right? So alcohol releases more kindergartners for you to fight. Sleeping pills give all those kindergartners knives, right? So three kindergartners with knives, you might get cut up a little bit, but you'll be okay. 10 kindergartners fighting you without knives, you're going to get punched a bunch probably in your groin because they're short, but you'll probably survive, right? 10 kindergartners with knives is probably going to kill you. So you have to be very careful about mixing sleeping pills and alcohol, just in case you didn't know that. Fun little fact. So these types of drugs are referred to as central nervous system depressants because they slow your brain down. Similar are what are called opioids, which manipulate the pain processing parts of your brain and reduce the amount of pain that you feel. So these types of things. So for example, if you're in the hospital, you got into a bad car accident and your body hurts, you might get a little morphine drip because it's going to reduce the amount of pain that you feel. Opioids, unfortunately, are very addictive because, weirdly enough, we don't like feeling pain. So we can get addicted to the pleasure that we feel from that reduction of pain. Hallucinogens, right? These are the drugs that make you trip out and experience the world and feel one with the galaxy. PCP, LSD, mushrooms, MDMA. They manipulate serotonin in the brain, which affects our mood. So they're often used if you've ever heard of microdosing. And the idea is since they help with the regulation of mood, if you take a little bit every day, it will help with your mood. Now, uh, we'll talk about this in a second, but self medication is something that many of us do, right? We feel stressed and we say, well, I'm going to smoke a little of this or drink a little bit of this. And I'll feel better, right? Or maybe you have a headache, right? You don't go to your doctor and say, I have a headache, what should I do? You just take an Advil or an aspirin or whatever thing makes you feel better, right? Self-medication on its own isn't problematic, but some behaviors can become abusive or addicting. Now, luckily, hallucinogens in general are not very addictive, but as we'll talk about, there is a difference between use and abuse. At this point, I wanted like some reggae music to be playing in the background, but I probably don't have the rights for that, and YouTube would definitely take it down. But cannabis is a commonly used recreational drug. We are seeing its recreational use become more widespread as it is becoming more legalized throughout the world. It's helpful with stress and chronic pain because it stimulates the cannabinoid receptors in your brain, which allows you to feel those wonderful feelings that marijuana can make you feel, right? So it is often used to help cancer patients because chemotherapy, two of the worst symptoms are the fact that you feel nauseous all the time and the fact that you lose your appetite. If you did not know this about the marijuana, apparently there's this thing that scientists are just learning about for the first time called the munchies, right? And apparently, the more you smoke, and I've not, you may have never heard of this before. This is again very new information. But the more you smoke, the more you crave food. Usually, Jack in the Box or Taco Bell specifically. So the uh, so marijuana has that beneficial quality for people who are in pain or dealing with chemotherapy. Now, the fun thing is, and by fun I mean terrible, is that alcohol and marijuana can be dangerous when mixed because marijuana reduces your nausea, and excessive alcohol increases your desire to throw up. Now, most of us probably don't enjoy throwing up, but the reason our bodies do it is to get things out of our stomach. If you're already bordering on alcohol poisoning, man, I sound like such a narc. Don't mix alcohol and marijuana, but yeah, be careful with it, right? But if your body's trying to get rid of all the alcohol in your stomach to prevent you from getting more intoxicated, right, then you need to vomit. That is why we vomit when we drink too much. Our bodies are like, let's not make this any worse for ourselves, right? But if you're smoking something or if you've taken an edible and that thing is telling you not to vomit, then you can't get it out of your body as easily. So when it comes to drugs, we have to be careful about what we're mixing with what. So we can talk about drugs without talking about steroids. Steroids aren't necessarily the same as the other types of drugs that we've talked about because most steroids are mimicking hormones instead of playing with neurotransmitters. Steroids by themselves aren't a bad thing. If you have asthma, you have probably taken a corticosteroid, or if you had like a weird rash, you had a steroid cream that you put on that part of the body to get rid of it, right? So steroids just mimic existing chemicals in the body, similar to how psychoactive drugs mimic neurotransmitters or affect their functions. But when they are abused, that can lead to issues. So the most common form of steroid abuse that we hear of is juicing, right? When you have athletes who are taking, I mean, just look at those muscles. Look at that arm. Look at this arm vein, right? This arm vein is bigger than my arm. Okay, that's a lot. But to have abs like that, right? So it's worth it. It's worth it because nothing bad happens when you take anabolic steroids, except for severe acne, hair loss, shrinking of the testicles, menstrual irregularities, infertility. I see that there's a typo there. I'm very sorry. Not menstrual, infertility, heart disease, and destruction of the heart, altered mood, and more. So, as with everything, we have to be careful and aware of what we put in our bodies and the potential long-term effects of these things. So let's talk about addiction. If you guys have very like conservative family members, I come from a family where like nobody smokes or drinks. So the first time somebody from my family heard that I like had a drink or had like a bottle of alcohol in my home, they like basically had an intervention because they were worried that I was an alcoholic, because only alcoholics have alcohol in their home, right? But that's actually not true. I know I seem like a big ol' narc, like a uncool Kenny, right? But I'm actually super cool. Drugs are great, and I'm adjusting my glasses and saying, in moderation. Okay, I'm not cool. That's fine. But just the use of a drug doesn't necessarily mean that it's problematic, right? So if I were to go do cocaine right now, which I might not, I'm scared. I have very delicate nostrils. What if it gets stuck in my nose forever? If I just use a drug, that's not necessarily problematic. Even sometimes excessive use of a drug isn't problematic. So let's say it's the weekend and you maybe are like, it's the weekend, I'm gonna do a Zoom call with all my friends and we're gonna play drinking games, and you have 5 whole drinks that night. Wow. Whew. That is a binge. Are you an alcoholic? No, right? Engaging in a binge, which is any type of excessive indulgence in a behavior, isn't necessarily problematic if it's infrequent, right? If you're drinking 5, 6, 7 drinks every night, we're seeing problematic behavior. But if you're just doing it like once every so often with your friends, right? If you look at like binging when it comes to food, we have specific holidays where it's culturally normal for you to eat more than your fill, right? And if you on Thanksgiving have a little bit too much to eat, that's not a eating disorder. Now, if you're eating way past your full every day, then that's what we might consider disordered eating. So a binge might be telling, but it's not necessarily a sign of danger. Now, what can happen is abuse. So what I might do is, well, I'm supposed to do this lecture for class, but oh boy, I haven't had any cocaine in a while. So, I call my friend and I'm like, I was going to say connect, but I didn't want you guys to think that I actually know how drugs work. But I just call my drug friend and and they're like, oh, you have to drive to Rancho Cucamonga to get cocaine because, I don't have any. And so like I'm like, well, I have to record this in 2 hours, but I need cocaine, right? Or if I come to class and I've done a bump and I need that to get my job done, right? If I'm putting myself in dangerous situations as a result of trying to get that thing, that is when we're looking at abuse, right? Or if I'm, missing out on things because I'm like, oh, sorry, I couldn't come to class today because I was too drunk to drive. That's abusive behavior. So when we're seeing excessive use or just any type of use get in the way of social and professional obligations, that's when we label it as abuse. And then we have addiction. So there are two types of addiction. We have psychological addiction and we have physical addiction. Now, think of these two as like a little Venn diagram because there's going to be some overlap between the two. But some things you'll see more psychological addiction, other things you'll see more physical addiction. So, psychological addiction is when you're addicted to the way something makes you feel, right? So if I have bad anxiety and I drink to get rid of that anxiety, right? Uh, that might be a relatively normal thing, right? I go to a party, I don't know anyone, I make myself a rum and coke, right? And I'm like, great, this makes me feel a little bit more at ease. So now I'm able to enjoy the party and meet people. Now, that's use, right? Not abuse, not necessarily psychological addiction. If every day I feel like I need to like drink in order to feel okay, so I have a work meeting in the morning, I have a little bit of vodka, I have office hours, I have a little bit of rum, right? I'm recording this lecture and I have a little bit more rum. That might be psychological addiction because I'm depending on this substance to allow me to do my day to day work. Now, that's different from physical addiction, which is when you're avoiding the withdrawals, right? So if you, like me, enjoy caffeine, you know that if you don't get caffeine, you will get a pretty terrible headache, right? So a lot of us who are frequent caffeine users are physically addicted, right? If we don't have caffeine, we get the headaches and we just feel so tired. And we have the funny memes that are like, don't talk to me if I haven't had my coffee, because we're addicted to it, right? We're trying to avoid the feeling of the withdrawal. And sometimes what we might see is an increased tolerance. So, beginning of the semester, you just needed one latte to make you to help you get through the day, and then you go for a latte with a double shot, and then you get one latte in the morning, and then another one with a double shot in the afternoon, and then you're up to three lattes, all double shots, right? You need more to get the same desired effect. That would be an example of physical addiction. So drugs aren't necessarily bad, but our use of them can get out of control. So be safe, be well, and, try microdosing. Am I going to get in trouble for saying that? I didn't say that. I just heard a study that said that you please don't do it. I love my job so much. Don't do it. Don't do it. Wink. But also really just don't do it. Wink.